Today, we're taking an in-depth look at the CIDOO C75, which was sent over by the folks at CIDOO. The C75 is a wired 75% top-mounted Hall effect magnetic keyboard with an aluminum case, polycarbonate plate, and volume knob. It's available from CIDOO for $140 pre-built with Gateron KS20 magnetic white switches and dye-sublimated PBT keycaps. You get a choice between two different colorways, silver and black. I was sent the black colorway. This is my very first experience with a magnetic keyboard, and I was initially pretty excited, but I quickly learned that I'm not really the kind of user that would get much benefit from the new features introduced by these magnetic keyboards. More on that in the magnets chapter of this video. The C75 is a pretty heavy, hefty keyboard with bigger bezels along the front and back than on the sides. The aluminum case is smooth to the touch with a very slight texture. There are bevels along all the edges and a bigger bevel along the front edge of the top case, going from the left and ending before the arrow keys. The included keycap set looks very nice and has a pleasant colorway. This is the exact same set you'll get with the silver colorway. On the top right, there's a copper colored volume knob and a light bar. On the silver C75, this knob is black. Looking from the side, we can see a two-tier design with a rectangular block sitting on a wedge. There's a copper accent piece here with black markings. On the silver version, it's black with copper markings instead. On the back, you'll find the USB-C port recessed on the left side of that bottom tier. Looking at the underside, you'll find 4 fixed rubber feet, 6 screw holes, and a big copper-colored accent piece with black markings. The included Gateron KS20 magnetic white switch is a pre-lubed linear Hall effect switch with a polycarbonate top housing, nylon bottom housing, palm stem, 15mm spring, and 50-gram bottom out force. The individual switches don't seem to make any unpleasant sounds, nothing scratchy, rattly, metallic, or pingy. Looking inside, we can see the differences between these and the cherry-style mechanical switches. There's no metal contacts here to detect actuation. Instead, there's a magnet at the bottom of the stem pole. On the keyboard, there are sensors that are able to determine the distance from these magnets, which is how the board is able to tell how far you've pressed each switch. The pole is also thicker, thus making the springs thicker. It's a bit hard to see the factory lubing, but it appears to be there on the stem rails and around the pole and spring. The included keycaps are nice and thick PBT with dye-sublimated legends in this old-school Apple keyboard style, with the oblique typeface and even Mac modifier keys. Overall, I like the look of it and I think it looks great on both the black and silver colorways. To start this teardown, let's first remove all of the keycaps and switches. Next, pull the knob off and flip the board over. You've got 6 hex screws to undo and there is a hex tool included with the board. Once these are all undone, flip the board back over and carefully lift the top case piece off. This is a top-mounted keyboard despite what the product page states, so the PCB plus plate assembly will come along for the ride. Don't just yank this all off as there is a cable for the daughter board that you'll have to detach first. The side accent pieces may come off alongside the top case like they did on my board. These just slot into the bottom case piece. Next, you've got 8 Phillips screws to undo to separate the PCB plus plate assembly from the top case piece. Looking at the top case piece, you'll see O-rings slotted around the screw holes. During my teardown, one of these came off along with the PCB plus plate assembly, so be careful not to lose any of them. Next, you've got 10 standoff screws to undo in order to separate the plate from the PCB. Looking at the plate, we can see some factory lubing in the stock plate-mounted stabilizers. Underneath the plate is a sheet of thick plate foam that appears to be stuck to a sheet of plastic. And underneath that is your standard thin sheet of sound-enhancing foam. There is no sound-enhancing plastic sheet here. Looking at the PCB, we can see holes for PCB-mounted stabilizers. Underneath the PCB, there's 2 sheets of foam. A thicker one that was pretty stuck onto the PCB for me, and a thinner sheet sitting inside the bottom case cavity. Looking at that cavity, we can see 6 screws that you can undo to separate the copper-colored accent piece from the bottom case. When I first started testing this board out, I immediately dove into all of this magnet business, but quickly found myself totally out of my depth. I understood the whole process of customizing the actuation point and what effect this has, but anything deeper than that was fairly incomprehensible to me. There are explanations in the software and in the manual, but they seem to be translations and not exactly done well. So I went searching for some YouTube videos on the topic and found the videos from Techless to be massively helpful in understanding all of this. If you're like I was and know nothing, then I would recommend watching those Techless videos linked in the description because they explain it all way better than I could ever hope to. Okay, so let's talk about how to use the software to customize the magnetic features on this board. Let's start with the most basic, changing the actuation point. First, go to the trigger setting tab. Next, select the keys you'd like to adjust by clicking on them individually or by dragging a selection square around multiple keys like you're playing Warcraft. Next, select the actuation distance by clicking along the key switch diagram or by dragging the slider. Click the apply button and you're done. Techless talks about rapid trigger, and this is called quick trigger in the C75 software and can be turned on with a checkbox. A new slider will appear that corresponds to the distance of travel required to reset and re-trigger the key press. There's also a new checkbox here, and toggling it on will allow you to set a different distance for resetting and re-triggering, or in other words, for the up action and down action. You can also customize the polling rate and calibrate keys if they're malfunctioning. Got all of that? I sure hope so. This is the part where I should put all of this to the test, but like I alluded to at the start of this video, I'm just not the kind of user who would get much out of all of this customization. I don't play competitive games, and I don't even particularly like games that require super fast reflexes. But of course, I need to at least try, so I browsed through my Steam library and through all of the free games I've amassed and never played on Epic Games. I settled on Nuclear Throne, a top-down roguelike shooter in the vein of Enter the Gungeon and The Binding of Isaac. I played with the default actuation setting of 2mm plus quick trigger turned off, and then I played with an actuation setting of 0.4mm with quick trigger turned on and set to 0.1mm. What did I find? Not a lick of difference. As for normal typing, I couldn't tell the difference between those same two configurations either. I am so not the right person for this. Before we move on, there are some more features in the software worth mentioning. Mod tap, toggle keys, and dynamic keystroke. These are featured on the C75 product page but not in the manual. Mod tap allows you to assign two different functions to one key, one for a tap and another for a hold. Toggle keys is kind of like turbo mode on controllers. And dynamic keystroke allows you to assign up to 4 different functions to one key depending on where you are along the key travel. It was a little bit difficult to wrap my head around the UI, but on this setup I have here, you've got different functions for the top of the press going down, bottom going up, and top going up. Let's first listen to the C75 as it came right out of the box. The board sounds kind of noisy in its stock form. Chattery is a word that comes to mind. I found that it seems to be happening mostly on the upstroke, and it's probably a switch thing as it did still happen even with different keycaps. Unfortunately, there's not much I can do about this since these are the only magnetic switches I own. Maybe the tape mod would improve things though, since there's no sound enhancing plastic in this board. It gets a little bit louder with the tape mod, which I prefer, but the chattering sort of sound is still present. It's not ideal, but not terrible either. Let's end this sound section with a comparison to a cleaner sounding keyboard, the Monsgeek M1V3. This isn't going to be a very scientific comparison, as we can't use the same switches on the two keyboards. I know it's not a huge difference, but I just can't get over that chattering. Perhaps some manual switch lubing would help, but I'm unwilling to go through that process ever again. Unfortunately, I'm probably the exact wrong person to be judging the CIDOO C75. This is a magnetic keyboard first and foremost, and as I discussed in the magnets chapter of this video, none of these magnet-enabled features make a lick of difference to me. In fact, my experience was actually negatively impacted by the fact that I couldn't swap out the switches with any of my existing mechanical ones to improve the sound. The C75 does get points in aesthetics and build quality, but again, it's impossible to fairly judge value for money without factoring in the magnetic features. As far as I can tell, the C75 does what a magnetic keyboard is supposed to do. And as far as I can tell again, those features are beneficial to the right users. So where does that leave us? Well, if you're like me and these magnetic features aren't useful to you, then I can't recommend the C75 at all. Otherwise, I'm afraid I can't make a definitive recommendation. You'll have to judge for yourself based on what matters to you. And that's my review of the CIDOO C75. What do you think about this keyboard? Do you find these magnetic keyboard features useful, or are you like me? Let us know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching.